Thank you. I am unmuted. I'm Sylvia Kuo from Brown University, and my talk is on revelations on student difficulties from reflective quiz responses on pre-recorded lectures. It's a bit of a mouthful. So I just want to motivate this from thinking about how do we maintain student engagement when we're moving from an in-person to a fully online or remote environment. My class became completely online, and so that meant that students were unable to ask questions in real time and have that back and forth. And I also worried that with pre-recorded videos that they would have this incentive to passively ingest the material and not actually do any processing. So just the punchline is I essentially pre-recorded my lecture videos, and then associated that with a set of reflective quiz questions, essentially an exit ticket, in particular asking like, what questions do you have on this lecture's material? And I found that those questions that came up sort of revealed a really interesting set of issues that I had not previously uncovered before, that were actually quite basic in terms of like the ideas and the concepts, and were actually quite humbling. So we'll talk about that. So just quickly, in terms of the evolution of my course structure, I teach a large upper level economics course. There are a lot of prerequisites. I have about 150 students per semester broken into two sections. Pre-pandemic, I really taught in-person chalk and talk, where I would actually write the material on the board and take students from questions, and we would have discussions on things. We were held 3 times a week. The undergrads, I had undergraduate TAs that would run weekly discussion sections, and then they would also hold sort of a 2-hour Sunday block office hours at the library, since homework was due Monday, and that's where all the students were. When I had to pivot in terms of the move to remote in spring, I needed to we could no longer meet in person, so everything was remote. I pre-recorded the lecture videos, which I would do, release as soon as I recorded them. And rather than have the undergrads run the discussion sections, I actually started running them myself live on Zoom, which would be recorded for students who couldn't attend on Fridays. And then the TA office hours shifted to an online discussion board where they would answer the questions asynchronously on Piazza. This past academic year, when I had more time to think about, how to actually make this change, I maintained a lot of the same format, but with I re-recorded my lecture videos into smaller pieces and associated each lecture with a reflective quiz. And then what was cool about that was I was able to also establish a due date by which they had to watch the videos and answer these questions, which was essentially in that Monday, Wednesday, Friday format. Except it was actually Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, because I used the Friday class in order to run my own discussion. Right, so the general setup was to take every lecture and to set it up as a quiz in Canvas. And I called it a lecture barometer because I was getting the pulse of the class, which is probably a incorrect biological use. There were 31 lectures, really 32, but 31 barometers. And so each was set up as a series of lecture videos pinned, and then it was the same set of open-ended questions. The first was just rating the effectiveness. The second was what was the most resonant idea from this lecture. The third one was the one that I was really interested in, which was any specific questions that you have or concepts that you found confusing that you want me to talk about. And the fourth was just an open comment space. So these were kept consistent over time. And these were basically just graded on the basis of effort. So I think whatever Canvas uses for grading, as long as there's something, I think, in the textbook, or in the text boxes, they would be graded as as a 1. It's essentially participation score, 10% of the final score, and they could miss 25% and still receive full credit. What would happen was every Friday morning, I would download the responses as a CSV file, relatively easy. So I'd have 3 lectures worth, 3 barometers, and I would scan them in order to figure out what to talk about every Friday. All right. So just to be really concrete about the intent of this design, for the students, what I really wanted to do was use this as a way of pacing out the content to roughly that Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule, instead of having them cram, which we all know is not so great for learning. The other thing is by having a consistent set of questions, I wanted to give them a framework to actively process that lecture content. So then maybe they're always thinking about that like most resonant idea or any questions they have as they're viewing the lecture. And to lower the cognitive burden because I'm not constantly pelting them with different questions. And it was supposed to be like an easy way for them to like earn this grade. For me, it was really to provide just-in-time questions on the course material, right? If I can't actually elicit like what questions do you have on that material, I'm getting that feedback. The really, I think, important thing about this process was that it democratized the question asking for the pool of, theoretically, all students. And so I could see that in general, like these are the things that students are struggling with rather than having a skewed sense of what they were having problems with from those who are able to actually ask questions, right, in class, that handful of students. This format also allowed them to be able to take their own time to articulate what a question could be and not in the 30 seconds during class. So I sort of like that. And it helps seed the discussion for students because when I found that I was trying to run these discussion sections when we first moved, and I would say, all right, any questions that you have, that would be met with silence. And I would have to give them some information so they could, like, as a springboard for like remembering what questions they had. All right, so I'll just say that the findings in terms of the types of questions that they were asking when they were articulating, I found them really humbling. As a longtime instructor for this class, I mean, I really thought I knew the things that they had problems with. And indeed, those questions did show up. However, I uncovered sort of unexpected, I will say, misunderstandings, and I categorized them. The first is they often asked why for questions for definitions and factual concepts. Why is this set up this? Why are bonds quoted as a fraction of 128? They just are. And relatedly, they would say, well, why would you choose X and not Y when there actually is no choice? Why would you choose to have an American option? Why I would rather have an American option rather than a European option, so why would I actually do that? No, you choose to have an option and it either takes this one form of an American option and it has these characteristics, or it takes this other form of a European option and it has these other characteristics. So that was interesting. The second is that I would find that there were questions that suggested larger conceptual problems with fundamental ideas. And this is getting at kind of far more questions on basic ideas than I ever expected. So these came in two forms. One was just the flat out very basic question, which kind of indicates that they're just not understanding a fundamental concept. Why are you using a sigma on the horizontal axis? Okay, this is now week 4. Sigma actually represents standard deviation. I've told you that this is a characteristic of investments in addition to expected return. We've done these graphs a lot of times. Okay, we need to catch up. But the second type, which I think is interesting, is, I'll call it the garbled question, where you read the question and you say, this question makes no sense because the pieces of what you're putting together doesn't actually make sense, and you're misunderstanding this idea and you're misunderstanding that idea and you're putting it together. And this is something that I actually want to spend more time unpacking. But remember, these types of questions are for the students that are maybe struggling a lot more with the material. And so they have a hard time articulating a question, and I'm finally uncovering what might be going on or not going on in their heads. All right, the third one is probably for the more capable students, where they would understand the individual concept, like how to solve for, the price at which a margin, there's going to be a margin call for a stock when you're selling short, but then they would have difficulty in fitting that into the overall structure of, sort of in terms of economics and this is a market-based idea versus individual choice. And I found that interesting because I talk about that, but it was to kind of I needed to sort of bring that back to this is an overall theme and these are how these different ideas are related together. The fourth one kind of came out in the live discussions, I think because I was eliciting some of these questions, but I found more examples when talking to students about the disconnect that students have between what they're learning in the classroom versus like how they interact with the world for that material. So the class I teach is investment, so it's a finance class. And so students would say, okay, I see that we believe that markets are mostly efficient, and so we should just go ahead and invest with the market, therefore we should invest in index funds. So why isn't everyone investing in an index fund? And I would stop and say, well, last week you just told me that you were like investing in GameStop, which if you recall, like this basically was essentially speculation. So you think you can beat the market, so you don't believe that actually in your own behavior. And so I think that that was actually really interesting because you're hoping that economics is going to teach them about like they're going to live their lives in the real world, and you're unpacking that. So the last thing I'll just mention is that because I was asking them sort of qualitative information 3 times a week for the entire semester, I actually noticed when they started burning out and flagging, and I could definitely see how the quality of responses were declining over time. All right, so my last slide is basically just lessons to keep in mind for the future, and these are ideas that I'm just sort of batting around in my head and considering. So, the things that I'm sort of thinking about, and we can sort of have a discussion about it, is like, well, all right, clearly, how clearly am I defining terms? Like, is it clear that they're definitions? Maybe there's something going wrong with some of these things. The other is like maybe there are ways in which I can give simple examples to illustrate an idea rather than going through like math with like a derivation with variable names. And I do that already, but I think the extent to which I need to do that more. So instead of saying I've got 2 stocks that are positively correlated and look, that means that their stock prices co-move together, which is true and I still talk about, it is better for me to say, so suppose we have the stock for Exxon and the stock for Shell. Oh, those are in the same industry, so of course those stock prices should mostly co-move together, and that's what it means to be positively correlated. The other thing is that, again, for sort of the better students, I found that a lot of them can apply like X formula to Y type of problem, but they're not understanding why they're doing it. And to actually make sure to bring it back to like, this is the like econ cognitive map, so they can remember that more, because oftentimes I would reference something that they should have known before, but they would have forgotten it. So to really,
Sylvia,
instill that.
Apologies. If you can summarize the last 2 points in 20
Yes.
seconds, that would be
so
great.
The last one is just also being cognizant of that maybe these inarticulate questions from the students that are struggling are maybe the most precious, right? It's like information that I had not had before, and they might represent the greatest opportunity for me thinking about like how to better express myself, because it's somehow I'm not reaching them. So those are the things that I'm thinking. That I just have a minor caveat, just that my signals could be imprecise, because since this was effort-based grading, students could have just like written a throwaway question containing buzz terms. But so that's sort of what I was learning. I'm happy to hear your thoughts. Thank you very much.